The natural environment provides us with probably the best source of inspiration when looking for subject matter to draw, and that is because it is filled with a variety of different creatures, plant life, which varies visually in so many different ways, which can be such an enriching place to seek out subject matter to draw. And in today's tutorial, we will be looking at one of the most unique and interesting creatures, and that is how to draw a lizard. So with that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artincontext.org, where we explore various art-related topics, and in today's video we will be learning how to draw a lizard. Now, this really fun and interesting creature is such a great drawing exercise because it provides us with a great opportunity to explore color variation, but also giving us a chance to understand how to shade, how to ultimately form a creature that has a very unique structure. So with that being said, we're going to start off with a very simple sketch of the lizard's body. So we're going to start with some light graphite pencils and then slowly build up some tonal value, start to integrate some color with colored pencils, specifically in this tutorial on how to draw a lizard, but otherwise the process can be used with various mediums. It's really up to you. However, in this particular tutorial, we will be using a combination of pencil, colored pencils, and some pen marks. So we're going to start off with a simple sketch using our graphite pencils, and using your HB pencil, we want to begin by drawing a curved line on the page. So this is going to establish the general flow of the lizard's body. From there, we can proceed to drawing an arrowhead shape at the one end of the line, and this is going to basically establish the head of the lizard. Now, as we proceed, we want to make sure that as we draw the body along the curved line, it is slightly narrow for the head of the gecko. So in this case, we are drawing kind of a gecko type of rock lizard. So you can look at some references on the internet to kind of assist you in your drawing process. And what's really great about drawing a lizard is you will find that they tend to share the same type of anatomical structure. However, their color variations and subtle differences in scales and textures tend to be quite different. So it really is a fun drawing exercise to play around with your colors, textures, and ultimately just playing around with how you create a very unique type of lizard drawing. So look at some images on the internet, get some inspiration, but otherwise, as we continue from there, we want to place the limbs of the gecko, which can be drawn in kind of a zigzag fashion. So by drawing the limbs in kind of a zigzag shape, we give more insight into the functionality of the leg. So we're trying to create this quality of defining that arc shape within the limbs that kind of defines the bone structure and ultimately represents a more realistic nature of how the lizard's legs actually function and how they are placed on an actual surface in terms of how it stabilizes itself. Now, since we are drawing the lizard from a side angle, in this case, we also want to keep in mind that one side of the lizard will be slightly less visible. So this means we will only partially see one side of the legs of the lizard. However, as they arc upward, we want to make sure that we are defining the bone structure as it kind of arcs upward in each limb and slightly is then visible behind the lizard. So try to keep the drawing quite loose at this stage. We're just trying to work out a general sketch, keeping it light, whereby we work out the basic structure of the lizard. Now, once we have done that, we're going to start refining the lizard sketch. So using your eraser and a pencil, you're going to proceed to lightly erase the lizard body sketch. So basically, we're going to establish some ghost lines to assist us in a more refined sketch at this point. Now, by leaving kind of a faint pencil sketch of the lizard body, we're going to be using that basically as an outline for a little bit more of a refined drawing. So starting with the head, we're going to work our way from the head to the tail of the lizard. So starting with the head, begin to kind of formalize the shape of the lizard's head, kind of refining it into something a little bit more realistic. Again, you can use a reference image in this case. The lizard head does have this kind of arrowhead shape, and whereby we add in little bulging curves as well to represent the eyes of the less visible side of the lizard. So the eyes of the lizard do tend to bulge outward slightly, and since we are drawing the lizard from a side, that eye that is less visible will kind of have a bulging quality, or we kind of define that eyelid as a bulging quality on that arrowhead shape. So we can also add another eye on the more visible side of the lizard. So this eye can be drawn as a leaf shape. That's another way to describe the shape of that eye, with some circular line work around it to also indicate its bulging formation. Now, as we work with our pencils and erasers, we also want to go through the body of the lizard, slowly adding more lines that define its form more clearly. So what we can do as well is we can also start to work on the hind legs, slightly enlarging those hind legs and giving the visible legs in the side, or on the side that sits in the foreground, a visible 5 digits. So lizards do have 5 digits on their feet and arms, or on all their limbs or legs, whatever you'd like to call them. So it's important for us, again, to just make sure we are referring to some sort of reference image to assist us in our drawing process. Now, as we work our way through the lizard's body and arrive at the tail, we can also slightly thicken the tail. So from here, we can proceed to give the lizard some patterns as well. Something we also want to bear in mind is the tail tends to be slightly thicker near the base as it connects to the lizard's body, and then slowly starts to become more narrow as it goes towards the tip. This can also be your own design when it comes to patterns and stripes. Again, you can refer to all sorts of lizard species on the internet to kind of give you a source of inspiration or be a reference point, but otherwise you can also just play around with how you represent these unique features in your own kind of way. And that's what's really great about a lizard drawing, because they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and have all sorts of patterns and styles. You can really play around with how you represent them in your own drawing. Now, consider how the stripes also further contextualize the lizard's form by wrapping around the lizard's body. And that's where we want to think about that cylindrical shape in terms of how we define the pattern on the lizard. So in the case of drawing something like stripes, we really want to make sure we are wrapping around the lizard. We can also play around with adding in some spots here and there, and perhaps keeping them in between the stripes. Now, basically, we also want to set up an outline version of the lizard drawing, helping us understand where to color as we kind of move into the later steps. Again, making sure that the stripes also flow with the form of the lizard's body is really important during this stage. Another little feature to get right is also to keep the body of the tail fat and its tip slightly narrowed towards the point, or as it slowly starts to go towards the tip of the tail. So we also want to make sure that the area where the tail connects to the body is slightly more narrow than the tail itself. So you'll kind of see how it has this thickened section in the center of the tail, and is slightly thicker towards the base of the tail as it connects to the body, but that connection point to the body will be slightly narrower than that of the actual main section or the center of the tail, and then naturally as it goes towards the tip it becomes thin again. Now we're going to move on to adding some color to the lizard drawing. In this case, we'll be working with some colored pencils. So from your colored pencils, you want to choose a nice bright color, starting with the stripes. Let's begin to kind of shade in the stripes a bit, and this will also help us keep consistency in coloration throughout the entire lizard. The idea with integrating color, especially in a drawing format, and if you're working with something like markers or colored pencils, the intention is to always establish these base layers of color and always build them up from lighter colors to darker colors, and ultimately darkening your drawing with some darker mediums, and in this tutorial we'll be using a dark medium like pen to really give our drawing contrast. But otherwise, allow yourself to explore variation of a single color to give it more depth. For instance, you can also blend pinks and purples as an example in the stripes to give the stripes kind of a more enriched coloration. So we're not just having these flat colors, but we're creating subtle gradients and playing around with that color combination within our lizard drawing. And this means you can also add different colors to different features. So as long as you keep the choices consistent for different features, for instance, you're keeping the colorations of the stripes the same, and then of the main features or the body underneath the stripes the same coloration, that kind of will have a more realistic representation of an actual lizard. But otherwise you can also just play around. Another thing to think of is perhaps to make the limbs a different color from the stripes and the main skin color of the lizard. Again, explore blends of colors in different features of the lizard to create more enriched colorations, but once again, that consistency quality is really important. Another thing to think about is kind of thinking about colors that kind of really seamlessly flow into one another. So for instance, this is where we really want to consider the spectrum of colors, and how, for instance, something like the combination of blue can shift into purple, which can shift into pink and then red, and then applying that same kind of color knowledge or color theory to your lizard drawing. So exploring color variations, exploring which colors kind of seamlessly merge well and integrate into one another is a really good way to think about integrating color into your lizard drawing. But otherwise, explore gradients and shades with your colored pencils. However, just remain consistent within the placement of your colors with the stripes, the spots and the limbs of your lizard. But otherwise, we're going to move on to actually shading with a pen at this point. So we're going to shade the lizard with a pen, kind of emboldening and adding more contrast to our lizard drawing. So once we have established some base colors in our lizard, we want to add some contrast with some pen shading. So starting from the tail, let's begin to add shading to the different features of the lizard. Now, a really good suggestion is to make sure you have a combination of ballpoint pens and maybe micron pens. So using pens in tandem with graphite pencils and colored pencils is really great to emphasize colored marks and pencil marks, because the graphite pencil and these microns kind of work really symbiotically with the process of graphite and colored pencils. And that is because the ink comes out quite sparingly, so you have a lot of agency over your mark making it a really fun way to have control over defining shading and quality with a pen medium. Now, the intention here is to give our lizard a little bit more three-dimensionality, and this is where we start to enhance the lizard's features and make it a little bit more realistic. So try to use your ballpoint pen to enhance the form of the lizard by creating gradients to establish three-dimensionality within the creature. Now, this means we want to start considering how we add more shading to certain parts of the lizard. So creating gradients gives the lizard a more three-dimensional quality, and that's a really important aspect to pay attention to, especially when we're creating these variations of shadows and highlighted moments, or areas that are darker and lighter. And the intention is to always have gradients that are seamlessly shifting between the highly shadowed areas and the illuminated or the lighter areas. Now, we do want to make sure we take our time with our pen shading process, and this is where we can also explore the potential of the medium. So we can explore line work, stippling, cross-hatching. It's really up to you, but the intention is to try and create seamless gradients to emphasize the form of the lizard. Now, since the lizard is also seen from an angle, a good suggestion would be to make one side of the lizard slightly darker, and by doing this we create shadowing on the creature, making it seem more realistic. The intention, however, is to keep that shadowed area or all the shadowed areas consistently to one side, because this kind of defines this idea that a light source is also coming from one direction. So we can also use shading to darken the stripes or skin areas of the lizard, and this is also a great way to kind of emphasize tonal difference in the coloration of the lizard drawing. So not only are we defining and building up our tonal values through pencil marks, colored pencil marks, but we can also do so through the shading process with a darker medium, in this case pen marks. And this is where we can really start to emphasize the differences in tonal value between skin and stripes, but also paying attention to the shadow formations to give our lizard drawing more three-dimensionality, which ultimately is how we are going to create a more realistic representation of our lizard. Now, as you work through the body of the lizard, think about the limbs and how you can use the lines and dots to enhance textural differences within the lizard drawing. Again, the way in which we can start to think about using our pen details is also to integrate some textural difference. So this is where stippling plays a really strategic role in terms of how you can utilize something like stippling to develop this idea of a grainy texture along the surface area of the lizard's body. So obviously adding little stippling marks can just be a great way of representing the scaly quality of the lizard skin. So we also want to make sure that as we slowly start to shift towards more delicate areas such as the face, we really pay attention to how we can strategically and really cautiously integrate these kinds of qualities in the finer features such as the face, where we're dealing with indentations and bulges around the eyes. So thinking about the three-dimensional qualities as well in terms of how we represent them through our shading process, but then also how we can represent textural qualities in these very delicate features of our lizard drawing is really important to think about during this pen shading process. But otherwise, again, make sure that there is consistency in contrast between the stripes and the skin color. That's another thing to really pay attention to. And this means that if you darken the stripes and spots, make sure this extends through the entire lizard. Again, making sure that we keep it consistent within our entire lizard drawing. Now we can also make the creases around the limbs of the lizard slightly darker. So again, thinking about the lizard skin does tend to be slightly loose in the joints area. So wherever the lizard does have these bending motions between the joints and how it connects to the body, we'll find that there are little creases within their skin, and this is something to represent, and it's a more finer detail to also pay attention to. So this suggests that any loose overlapping skin, as we kind of make them darker, is creating little moments of shadowing drawing. So darkening any overlaps of skin or darkening any creases within the skin of the lizard is just another way to have a more realistic representation of shadowing within those areas. Now another thing we can do is we can also make the entire eye of the lizard black with a little negative spot to suggest a reflection of light. So naturally the lizard does have this darkened eye as a nocturnal animal. However, because it's a glassy surface, it will reflect light, so we can leave a little negative space within the eye. But otherwise, at this point, you can use your ballpoint pen to also darken certain angles in the lizard. So don't be afraid to shade directly over the color as well. That's another thing to think about. The color does set a base layer, but you can shade with your ballpoint pen over the lizard, and by doing so you darken that coloration, and that kind of represents how certain areas of the lizard are less exposed to light, so naturally those colors or the coloration of those areas will become slightly darker. So don't worry about shading over the lizard. Again, make sure the eyes are also something you really pay attention to. The face is a really delicate feature of the lizard and really is kind of like the main focal point of our lizard. So we want to make sure the eyes do have these little highlights, giving it a more realistic quality of that glassy surface area that is capable of reflecting light. Otherwise, try to take your time with the head as you add some shading to refine its form and structure. But otherwise, guys, make sure you go through your entire lizard drawing, tweaking any little details as you feel necessary. As long as you keep consistency throughout the lizard drawing, you should end up with a realistic lizard drawing. But otherwise, guys, that is the general process of how to draw a realistic lizard. Some key concepts to kind of take away from this video: remember to build up your drawing, especially when you are drawing something realistic. Start simple with these general shapes, then kind of refine those shapes into more identifiable features. From there, you can slowly start to build up your base layers of colors if you're working with colors or lighter shading, and then ultimately enhancing those qualities by building up your tonal values with darker marks. In this case, we used a darker medium like ballpoint pen in tandem with something like micron pens, and that's also where you can start to explore how shading emphasizes the three-dimensionality, but also can be used to darken features, add texture to various features, and then ultimately building on that until you have completed your entire drawing. But otherwise, guys, thanks again for tuning in. If you did like this video, please do like the video and subscribe. That helps us to grow the channel to make more art related content for you guys, which we love to do. And if you are interested in similar or related topics to this, whether it is drawing animals or natural structures or anything kind of related to nature, please do let us know in the comment section below. We love to hear your feedback, and that helps us to understand what we can make for you that is just helpful or interesting to you guys. But otherwise, thanks again for tuning in. That is it from me today. Until next time, cheers.